You want to start, or?
Probably not. I've never played the piece before. I'm very excited, but this is one of these things that, you know, in music class we always, it's like one of those 20th century standards that we have to study and learn about. I'm very excited to finally have a chance to play it. It's not something that comes up normally in any other kind of musical setting, like for me at the symphony or other chamber music organizations. I did have a chance 2 weeks ago to play the Verklärte Nacht. So I'm excited to get kind of the two really...
The two different versions of Arnold Schoenberg.
Yeah. The farthest apart that you could get when he's like at the peak of his like neo-romantic style, and now, like you said, even 100 years old, something that is still like kind of weird and shocking to audiences today.
Part of it is a geeky reason, because in music circles and in classrooms there's so much time spent talking about the technique of it, what it represented, how new it seemed at the time. There's a built-in kind of academic support system to keep the work discussed. But from the audience perspective, which is really much more interesting to me, I think part of it is trying to figure out, trying to grow closer to the work and figure out what the real subject matter is. That hyper-expressionist German poetry is so out there, and there are so many different ways to take the meaning of all that. There's a lot of ambiguity to it. You know, Pierrot is supposedly a male character, but it's sung by a female usually. And I think that opens up a really broad canvas of what the work can mean, and I think people are endlessly fascinated by that broad scope of meaning. Now what we've done in Drunken Moon is try to give that a much more focused kind of shape. We have definitely in Drunken Moon, we have made an opinion about what we think Pierrot is about. I guess I would say it's what we think Pierrot is about in this particular show. In some other show, Pierrot might be very different, but in our performance, Pierrot definitely has a very clear structure to it and meaning. And we do that in a couple of ways. One of them is by combining it with Kieran Macmillan's new work called Drunken Moon and putting the two together as though they're one piece. Another way is that our Pierrot is done with two characters instead of one. It's got a male and a female. And we do it in English instead of doing it in German. And that last step alone, which Schoenberg said he was in support of, you know, he said if you do these works in another country, you should translate and do it that way. But it's very, very rare that it happens. So hearing that music, not in German, where you can actually understand, assuming you're an English speaker, you actually understand, it changes things, you know, appreciably. Because it's no longer a kind of soundscape with some text dust thrown in. You're actually hanging on the words, and we've gone even further and made those into characters in a story and built a set and put them in a bar, and you know, it's a very specific kind of rendering of Pierrot. I did it actually about a year and a half ago at Michigan State, and the composition professors wrote to me about it, and they said, you know, in this performance of Pierrot, for the first time ever, I was able to not think about the academic side of the piece. Like for a moment that was suspended. I wasn't concerned about the language or the technique of the notes or anything. And I simply went along this person's journey, this experience of it in a very different way. And I thought that was the ultimate mark of success. That's certainly what we were trying to do.
Maybe tell me a little bit more about your ideas in programming when you kind of look back across the whole 20th century and you see some of these iconic works by Messiaen or Crumb, and you feel like that works well alongside brand new music. Well,
again, so much of what we have done here has been trying to put works in context, right? So I'll use a famous example, Cage 433, that everybody kind of, they think is this wonderful little novelty piece, and they either make fun of it or there are a few people that think it's really this great serious epic thing or whatever. But nobody knows how to program the thing. You just find some weird place to do it and then you do it. But to try to find how that work would be featured well, I think that's really the place that we've come in and tried to fix that. So in this performance that we call To the Earth, we open with this short work by Frederick Rzewski that Ian plays on flower pots called To the Earth. And then they do this titanic Messiaen quartet for the end of time, which is certainly not new music by most traditional standards, but in this context, I think it feels very, very fresh, and it's part of this continuum about what the story is about. And then how can you follow the quartet for the end of time with anything? That's what everybody said. Like, that's the last piece. You're done.
It is the end of time.
It is the end of time. Except that that's not what we do. We follow that with Cage 433. And actually, it's a much more effective way to finish your experience with the quartet for the end of time is to have a kind of controlled silence rather than to just, this seems so flimsy by comparison to the experience that you just went through, So I think a lot of our work has not been necessarily about trying to find the newest things, but to try to find new ways to combine a broad swath of new material and turn the whole experience into something new. I guess that's the best way I could put it.
Yeah, that's excellent.
The hardest part is always just starting with great source material, And I don't care how old it is. I mean, something like Preveiw has great source material. The Quartet for the End of Time is great source material, Just about everything Crumb wrote is great source material. And you also have to remember that we talk about new music because we're all musicians from a rather studied perspective. But the vast majority of people that are coming to concerts and looking for a new and fresh experience are not evaluating that in that way. They're just looking to be moved and communicated with in some fashion. And if you say to them some composer that we think of as, really old and progressive, like Charles Ives, for example, they've never heard of Charles Ives and don't care. And it shouldn't really matter, ultimately, that they do or don't, Listening isn't always an evaluative, critical process. Sometimes it can be a purely emotional response, And that's what we've tried to work on here.